Year two of Jedd Fisch out in the northwest of the United States is about to hit, and there could be some teams on the hit list as the rebuild continues for the Huskies. Next on the College Huddle. And joining us now is Hooligan 7 from the Sound the Siren Podcast. Hooligan, welcome to the College Huddle.
Thanks, man. Always happy to be here and happy to chat ball with you.
Yeah, it's good to have you and your co-host there from Sound the Siren, a part of the College Huddle. Year number 2 now of building this behemoth independent podcasting community that we have started. And let's talk a little bit Husky ball now. Year 2 of the Jedd Fisch era, year 2 in the Big Ten, and I'm really interested to get your perspective on where he's at in this build, in this era, and where the fan base feels like you guys are at. So let's just start right there with that question.
Yeah, I think it's really it's going to be a night and day from year one to year two. I think there were a lot of building blocks that got laid last year, but in talking through the season preview when we chatted basically this time last year or leading into the 2024 season, the huge variable for Washington in 2024 was what does the line play look like? Certainly with that transition into the Big Ten, if the line play had been average, maybe above average, you probably would have seen those close games that Washington lost last year would have gone a different direction and would have ended up something that looked a lot better than 6 and 7. With that said, a lot of those areas have been shored up, whether it be through the transfer portal. This is a staff that has always had a tendency, and last year was really the first time, with Jedd Fisch as a head coach, that you didn't see a ton of freshmen playing on the offensive line. They'd had some standout all conference players, or at least all conference freshmen while they were at Arizona. It's really about building the depth. Obviously, Washington 23 to 24 experienced a huge turnover, change of head coach, 10 NFL draft choices, over half the roster, departed either to the league or to the transfer portal or to graduation. A lot was net new last season. That's not the case. You have more returning starters this year. You've had more strategic ads as opposed to anybody and everybody that we could get our hands on in the transfer portal. And in that point, in 2024 for the transfer portal, with where that coaching change happened in the calendar, we didn't get to leverage the full fall slash early winter transfer window, and so it was really uh, putting putty and plaster over some pretty big holes, as opposed to the structural work that needed to be done. And a lot of that has happened now, and we're seeing certainly some of the fruits of that. With a lot more experience coming back into on the roster this year, and then recruiting has taken a huge step forward from what it had been in year one, and I would argue, I might be a slightly hot take, but I think top to bottom, this is probably the best recruiting staff that Washington has had since the golden era of Don James back to the late '80s, early '90s. Certainly, you go back to the Chris Peterson era at Washington. There were position coaches that recruited very well, and we had some top 15, top 20 classes, but a lot of the heavy lifting was done there by Scott Huff on the offensive line. By wide receiver recruiting, and you had classes that included Puka Nacua, Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan. But top to bottom, this is a staff that just gets after it on the trail at a level that we haven't seen in a while. So I think the future is certainly very bright, and then certainly looking to 2025, I think the expectation among the fan base is that Washington is going to take a pretty significant step forward.
Let's talk a little bit about that coaching staff. You lose Steve Belichick, Brennan Carroll, and you promote Jimmy Doherty, and you bring in a name that those of us in the Midwest are very familiar with, and Ryan Walters. Talk to us a little bit, maybe the thought process behind those hires and promotions.
Yeah, I certainly think in a lot of ways, there really what in title there was an offensive coordinator change. But when you have a coach like Coach Fisch, who's got a pretty significant hand in the offense, ultimately, at the end of the day, Jedd Fisch is calling the plays, and so underneath that, I think Brennan Carroll, in departing to work for his father, Coach Belichick, departing to work for his father. I think actually, and this is one of the areas where recruiting has taken a step forward, is certainly offensive line recruiting. I think you see that in how Washington closed the 2024 class late, with flipping John Mills from Texas as an example of that. Early in 2025, you've seen Washington flip, and I'll put the caveat: I get that Cody Green grew up in Renton, went to moved to California to play for Mater Dei in high school, but ultimately the last couple of years and the last couple of staffs, Oregon was kicking our butt on the trail. Whereas this year, you're starting to see Washington, and flip Cody Green, who had been committed to Oregon, flips to Washington. Derek Holman Brusso, looking at Ohio State and Oregon, commits to the hometown school in Washington. And that was something that certainly wasn't happening over the course of Lake, and even to some extent with how the Dbor staff was handling in-state recruiting in Washington. Obviously, JT Tuomalau, national champion at Ohio State, uh, you know, played his high school ball 20 miles from campus, from UW's campus. So I think that transition, and then certainly with Coach Walters, I think the defense took a step forward with Coach Belichick. And I think both there were ways that the fan base was a little disappointed in how Coach Belichick had performed and the defense had performed, even with the caveat of, a huge overhaul on the roster, and certainly injuries just played havoc on the Huskies defense last year, with Zach Durfee being out, with the Parker twins getting hurt in the Iowa game, and there's a lot more depth, and certainly that's one of the things that Washington is really keying on, and or at least the fan base is keying on, in terms of one of the steps forward that we'll take into 2025. Of course, with Coach Walters, is there's just a lot more depth, and you're not going to see this defense, health allowing, wear down and just be ground into dust by the power run games in the Big Ten, the same way that we were in 2024, because of scheme and depth issues.
Makes sense. That makes sense. You brought up that Jedd Fisch is going to be calling the plays. Is there any talk at all about him maybe turning over that play calling duty at any point in order to manage more of the team? Is
I
it
mean, or at least, I think that it's not an exact, but certainly he has a pretty significant voice in that room, whether he's calling, and like there's Oregon, his is the final say. Um, I certainly think what I would say is, and that's not to, cast any disrespect to Coach Doherty, who's done a, who's obviously called, or, had a hand in some really, in helping Coach Fisch, while he was at Arizona, you know, under difficult circumstances. Washington's offense wasn't awful last year, but it's also going to look significantly different with a quarterback that they recruited specifically,
right?
versus Washington was in a, like I said, a few minutes ago, Washington was in a situation like, okay, yep, you've got experience. Okay, yep, come here, you can play.
We're checking
That's
pulses on the sideline and
like,
making sure they got jerseys on, right? I mean,
yeah, you go
okay.
from, and no disrespect to Will Rogers, who, demonstrated some exemplary leadership, was always there to answer questions for Deon Williams as he was coming up last year. And one of Demont, like, and Demont has said, like, Will was his go-to guy on the team. Like, if he had a question, Will was absolutely there. And so certainly that kind of leadership and um, personal integrity, nothing but respect for Will Rogers. But Demont Williams is is a different level at the quarterback position. Like, Will Rogers would need a jetpack to run like Demont Williams does.
Yes, yes. You brought up Damon. Let's go there, man. Let's talk about the exciting young quarterback. Last year I pulled up his stats, and obviously not having not really played till the end of the year significantly, 82 completions on only 105 attempts. That is a completion percentage of 78%. 944 yards, which is 9 yards average per attempt. 8 touchdowns, only one interception. 83 carries for 282 yards and a pair of scores. This guy is electric, man. He is electric, and it sounds like he's going to be unleashed this season.
Yeah, he's added. one of the big things, and what I saw at the spring game, and the spring game was a little bit of an interesting experience because the way the rosters were constructed, like the first string line wasn't together, and so a lot of the depth that I was referring to earlier on the defensive line, that showed up in a big way in our spring game. Damon didn't necessarily have his best day, but it was also without Denzel Boston didn't play, Omari Evans didn't play again, and it was not a cobbled together offensive line, but there were like a few starters in the line that were projected starters in the line in front of him, and then some guys that are probably going to be you know third guard, fourth guard, or fourth tackle when we get to the fall. Uh, the sky's the limit for Deon Williams. It really, really is. The athleticism he's added, I think, 20 or 30 pounds from last season. So some of I mean, I guess this is a big boy football It's a big boy football conference. Um, he's got the agility and foot speed that some of those hits are going to probably not. He's not going to take them because he's just going to either spin out of them or run away from them due to his athletic gifts. Certainly a very gifted passer. There's a ton of depth in the wide receiver room. Adding some experience with Omari Evans. There's some young players in that room that have, sky's the limit kind of potential. Raiden Vines had a huge spring game. Uh, and I think that there's just a lot more ways that Washington can hurt the opposition in 2025 than we could in 2024. Jonah Coleman has slimmed down. You've established some more depth, and there's some more quality depth behind him. Where last year we were kind of a one horse show in terms of the running game, but that's just only going to open things up more for Deon Williams, and with the offensive staff being able to say, okay, we've got more that we can do and more ways that we can scheme against defenses to whether that's to take advantage of Demon's skill set, whether that's to take advantage of, put Jonah in matchups, get him isolated either on the outside, split him out of the backfield, or, one of the guys that's going to, I think, play a pretty big role in the rotation this fall is Jordan Washington, who has elite level speed. And that's just going to cause some matchup problems.
Before we dive into the schedule and I get your take on what your early anticipation will be for the Huskies in 2025, I do need to ask you a question about Kalen DeBoer. Now, obviously, we've moved on and we're definitely in year two of Jedd Fisch. But what was the Huskies' opinion of DeBoer's first year in Alabama?
Uh, I'm not going to lie that every time he stubbed his toe, that the majority of the fan base was not sad about it. Uh,
Okay, okay.
particularly in light of the context of or the state of the program as where the program was when he left it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
like we appreciate what Coach DeBoer did while he was at Washington. There are certainly very few programs. Uh, you know, your favorite program, being an exception, one of the exceptions can say that they've had a better year than Washington did in 2023. Yes, we fell just short of the ultimate goal, but 24 wins in 2 years. That's some pretty good times for a fan base.
Yeah.
But a lot of the depth issues, I have, as much as I give credit to Coach Huff and Coach DeBoer for what they did while they were here, the the uphill battle that our new staff had to fight last year, with who basically was in turn in our rotation, or the rising players in the depth on the lines, um, particularly offensive line. I've said it a couple times on social media, like literally, what were they doing? Like, why? With with how the team is performing on the field, how and they blatantly kind of rubbed some people wrong in state in recruiting. Uh, Somebody that I'm going to call out and is going to be a standout player on the defense with Coach Walters, and who I think Coach Walters is very, very happy that Coach Fisch's staff at Arizona had developed a relationship with and gotten committed to Arizona, and then followed them north, as a local player named Rashawn Clark, who's going to play in the secondary, not kind of in a nickel safety type role
Hmm.
all over the field in the spring game. Incredible athlete. Um, And he had, at the time that Coach DeBoer left, I believe, was committed to Cal, and then Arizona flipped him over to Cal from Cal, and our staff had basically ignored him and like, oh, maybe kind of treated as like, okay, we'll take him as a last resort. That kid's going to play as a redshirt freshman
Mm,
and
interesting.
look good doing it. So uh, I don't think that there's a bunch of the fan base that is really cheering for Coach DeBoer in Alabama. It
Were
just
you were you surprised by his struggle in year one in Tuscaloosa?
yes and no. Um, I think a lot of the SEC's reputation is a little bit overblown,
Mm-hmm.
particularly, and a lot of it is just built on like um, certainly the ESPN connection. Yes, is it a good is it a great league with absolute big time programs? Absolutely. But I mean, they also it's a league that's also as liable to stub their toe against a bad program as anyone. I mean, like we'll use Alabama as an example. Oklahoma was bad last year, and Oklahoma beat them by 3 touchdowns. Like I don't care. Yes, they had head coaching turnover, but Alabama is Alabama, and it's not like Nick Saban left that cupboard bare by any stretch of the imagination. Um, yeah, I was a little surprised, um, given particularly how adept Kalen has been throughout his career at having elite level offense and how much they struggled on that side of the ball. Uh, for that matter, it's why I'm not necessarily I'm nowhere near as big a Seahawks fan as I am a Husky fan. But when I see Seahawks, pick up Jalen Milroe, I'm like, what are we doing? To play quarterback?
Interesting. Okay. Well, thank you for scratching that itch for me. I was very curious how you and the Husky fans would view that from this past season. All right, let's take a look at the schedule together. Now, this is going to be very interesting. Um, you start off with Colorado State at home. You play UC Davis in week 2. You get a bye, and then the Apple Cup is on the road this year. That's your non-con. What's your overall view of the non-con schedule?
Um, I don't love necessarily. I mean, I enjoy my time at Husky Stadium regardless. I don't necessarily love that both of those first 2 games are 8 p.m. Uh, that's a long day for a payoff that should be a foregone conclusion, particularly with the aspirations that this team has this year. With the departures from Washington State and even like uh, let's call a spade a spade. That was a game Washington gave away with both hands last year. That wasn't a home game. But it was a game that Washington had won, should have won. Credit to Washington State, they played the game. They executed, and Washington didn't. But that shouldn't have been a game last year with the departure from Washington State. If we don't go out there and absolutely boat race them, that's going to be a warning bell for me.
Mm.
Um, and then obviously, there's a fairly significant team coming to town immediately after the Apple Cup.
Yeah, on the 27th, Ohio State comes to town. I anticipate this being a huge game for both teams. Number one, I believe Washington will probably be undefeated. Number two, Ohio State will either be undefeated or will have one loss on their record from Texas, in which if that's the case, getting a second loss that early from the Buckeyes will be a sky is falling in Columbus, Ohio moment for that fan base. So a huge game. This is actually a rivalry that goes back. I call it a rivalry, but it's a Big Ten Pac-12 rivalry that went back many years.
Hmm.
As a Buckeye fan, I remember watching my cousin Ryan Miller, who played for Ohio State. I remember watching him play against Washington in a home and home series back in the 90s. We've played each other in bowl games before, so this is going to be a really interesting, good game to rekindle and welcome you to the Big Ten type of game. Then you're on the road at Maryland, home against Rutgers, and then on the road at Michigan. That's your first four in conference opponents there. Let's take the first three: Ohio State, Maryland, Rutgers. I would say Washington fans say if we come out of this 2-1, we're feeling pretty good, especially if we start 3-0.
Yeah. I think 2-1 will feel good. Particularly, it kind of depends on the context of how that Ohio State game looks. If that, if Ohio State blows Washington out in that game, I think there's going to be some eyebrows raised. And I think there are reasons that, in my mind, that game should be very competitive and could even lean Washington. Number one, Washington owns the second longest home winning streak in the country at 20 games. A similar situation, obviously, Ohio State's significantly more talented this year than Michigan was last year, but you have a brand new quarterback for defending national champion coming to what is and will be, particularly if Washington takes care of business early, a very, very loud and hostile environment. And uh, that's not the easy. It's not the easiest place to play in the world.
No, it's not. It's got a great reputation. And Ohio State will be bringing in a first year starting quarterback to that game as well.
Yep.
So be very interesting to see how that goes. But that'll be for a different podcast down the road.
Yep.
Um,
Speaking to
we,
Maryland and yeah, Maryland and Rutgers, I think
yeah,
we're uh, I'll say historically, I'm happy to be playing Maryland in October. If we were playing Maryland in September, Maryland always seems to come out of the gates, all cylinders filing. Like, oh, they could be good. This could be their year that they actually do something, and then calendar flips to true fall, and Maryland
yeah. Maryland
explodes. So
realizes who they are. Yeah,
yeah, the next game, Rutgers was a game Washington gave away last year. Outgained them, I believe, by over 150 or 200 yards. Had a first time I've ever seen it. I mean, I'm not blaming the refs, but celebrated block field goal. Player ran directly onto the field right in front of a referee. Wasn't involved in the play whatsoever. So I mean, it was absolutely a penalty, but that it was a key point in that game. So I certainly would expect 2-1 out of that stretch. If not, I'm not going to full on expect 3-0, but don't be surprised if a big upset happens on September 27th. And then yeah, going on the road to Michigan, that's going to be a tough game.
yeah. Let's talk about those next two because you have two of the, I would say, uh, more of the interesting Big Ten teams this year, Michigan and Illinois. Michigan, who knows
Yep.
what's going to happen with that? There's a lot of buzzards circling Ann Arbor right now from the NCAA. This could be a team with a giant chip on their shoulder. It could be a team that at this point in the season is already looking at like what's the future hold for us. So that could be very interesting. And to be honest, Washington, they beat them last year. So can they do it again in their house? That's the question. And then Illinois comes to town in what might be sneakingly one of the better Big Ten games of the year.
Yep.
Illinois, I think Illinois might start the season in the top 10. They have the most returning talent in the Big Ten. They have a ton of momentum. They have one of the most experienced quarterbacks in the Big Ten that comes back, and now they're coming into the Northwest, into what is obviously going to be probably their toughest road game of the season. This one, circle this one, guys. This might be a primetime game everybody needs to have their eyes on.
Yeah, it very well could be a game that will decide, if one of those teams flashes towards, contending in the conference race, or, I think both teams are definitely in that, have potential to play the Indiana role this fall, and could be the, the under the radar team that sneaks in, not sneaks, but is maybe unexpectedly in the CFP picture. Um, I have a ton of respect for Illinois and what Coach Bielema has done there. I think particularly one of the interesting things, and I think is going to be a key thing in that game, is they bring back a ton of talent, but they're also replacing most of their receiving core. So how that chemistry gels, particularly, I know inclement weather is not anything any Big Ten team is surprised by or intimidated by, but uh, atmospheric rivers are not uncommon in the Pacific Northwest, and that can somewhat mitigate a running game. I know they lost the running back to a late transfer, and that's a game certainly where the ground game is going to be hugely important.
Yeah, keep your eye on that one. By number two, and then the last four to finish off the year. You're going to be at Wisconsin, so you'll get to experience jump around for the first time. You host what is the bottom dweller of the Big Ten in Purdue at UCLA. They got a quarterback now, but we'll see what they look like this year. And then and then the big one at the end of the year, man. You host Oregon, and what could be possibly the game that will either send Oregon back to the Big Ten championship or not. And if something's on the line against Washington, Oregon usually chokes in that game against the Huskies. So, what you think of these last four here?
Yeah, I think that's certainly one where, again, I would hope for at least 3-1 out of that stretch. But I think one of the big variables is going to be Wisconsin. Wisconsin, Luke Fickell might not be there anymore by that point in the year
He might
with
not.
and that could go both ways. You could have a team that just folds up shop and then, or plays their hearts out for the interim head coach. Certainly I won't disrespect the elite environment and experience at Camp Randall. I was hoping to make that trip this year. That's not going to come to fruition. So somewhere down the line, um, Purdue at Husky Stadium. As much as I have respect for Coach Odom and what he was able to accomplish at UNLV, this is year one, and a team that was that far down is not going to come to Washington and win in November, unless the wheels have completely fallen off the Husky
Yeah,
bus. That's just
yeah.
um, Washington. Historically, we always struggle on the road in LA, or we have a tendency to struggle on the road in LA. Um, we don't miss traveling to the Arizona schools by any stretch of the imagination. So that one could be, a sneaky surprise game where we certainly also we need to be careful there and not look too far ahead. If we're having a really good year, we can't look past UCLA by any stretch of the imagination because there's enough there. Hey, it came up and they bit us 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And then Oregon at Husky Stadium, regardless of how kind of both team season is going, it's going to be loud. It's going to be one of the most hostile environments in the country that week. But it's going to be a fun one, and I certainly think that the gap has significantly closed between Washington and Oregon from last year to this year. Certainly, Dylan Gabriel was not Bo Nix for them last season. Uh, Dante Moore, while very, very talented, we let off the conversation today talking about what Deon Williams was able to do in limited time. Um, that's a rehabilitate Dante Moore with what we saw from him on the field at UCLA with some talent around him. Not the greatest team, not the greatest coaching in the world. Chip Kelly as an offensive coordinator versus Chip Kelly as head coach. That's two different animals. But he did not look good in his freshman season at UCLA. So the jury is still out, and there again with what Washington has done, and specifically, even going back to the Illinois game and where Washington, a strength of Washington's defense this year is going to be in the secondary. There's depth, there is length, and I would, to be honest, like in terms of the big matchups at Husky Stadium this year, I worry more about Jeremiah Smith than I do about Evan Stewart or the Duck receivers. Period. I mean,
So
Jeremiah
if
Smith's probably the best offensive player in college football. So, but
he's pretty good.
he's special. But Evan Stewart, as good as Evan Stewart is, he's also a 5'11", 6-foot receiver, and Washington has two basically pterodactyls at corner.
That's a great description, pterodactyls. I like that. I might have to steal that from you. That's good. Um, okay, so let's do a ceiling and floor here for the Huskies, and if I'm reading your reaction to this schedule right, this could be a pretty significant gap between the floor and the ceiling. So give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that really those X factor, I would say the swing games of the season are Ohio State, Michigan, Illinois, and Oregon. And Washington goes 3 of 4 in those. This could be a playoff team. If those games don't go our way and there's some carryover, some trickle down effect, and hangovers, it could flip the other way. I would say the floor should be, or what I would say is our fan base. I think anything worse than 8-4 or 9-3 is going to be a pretty significant disappointment. with the roster change, with the holes that have been filled, with the potential that Deon Williams has, with the potential that the running game has, with the potential that the passing game has, with added talent. So there's really kind of what I would, I think if we see another 500 season, that's going to raise some pretty significant, maybe not red flags, but there's going to, the seat will get warmer on Fisch. Not, he wouldn't be, fired and sent packing, but consecutive 500 seasons would not give us the warm fuzzies.
Not be met with a contract extension, anyways.
Right.
Okay, so I'm gonna set it at for you guys at 7-5 is the floor, and 11-1 is the ceiling.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, 11-1 is the ceiling. Like an incredible roll would have to come. I mean, they'd need to go on a roll like the 2023 team did to exceed 11-1. I would say, I think I might even argue 10-2, but again, 10-2 could get you there,
Well,
could get you
that's
to the
probably
playoff.
going to get you in the playoff. 10-2
Right.
is probably going to get you in.
Yeah, 10-2
So
could get you in the playoff, and then from there, in terms of the overarching picture of the Fisch era at Washington, this team goes 10-2 this year, and then regardless of kind of what happens in the playoff, the sky is the limit in 2026.
there you go. Okay. So you kind of get an idea, folks, on what they are thinking up there in the Northwest when it comes to year 2 of Jedd Fisch and the Huskies. Hooligan, tell everybody where they can find you and your awesome podcast.
Yeah, we're at so the podcast is basically at Sound the Siren UW, basically everywhere. Twitter, YouTube. I'm at Hooligan7_STS on most social medias, or just at Hooligan7UW on a couple places. But that's where we are. We're in mostly a little bit of a quiet period, and uh, recharging to go full bore as we get into the fall and into the later summer. But we'll be back. Like, there's certainly some things that we're working on, some special projects that we're going to work on, and have some crossover episodes with some of our colleagues in the UW podcast community. I'm certainly planning on, as time allows, bringing back the Montlake Memories kind of subsection of episodes, talking to former athletes about their time at Washington. But that's where we are, talking dogs all the time, and certainly always happy to collaborate across the College Huddle network.
There you go, folks. So all else fails, go over to thecollegehuddle.com, scroll over to the Big Ten, look down at Washington. There you'll find the links for everything he just mentioned for the Sound of Siren. And if you are a Washington fan, we highly encourage you to please subscribe to the College Huddle YouTube channel here. We are talking college football multiple times a week here on the College Huddle. Hooligan will be back again. We'll be doing some cross collaborations. You don't want to miss all of that. And of course, when we get into the season, you'll see this guy's face all over the place talking about the
You'll get tired
Huskies.
of me by then, particularly if the season goes as well as we hope it does.
Oh, there you go, guys. Thank you so much, Hooligan. Appreciate it. I got one final question, and I think I know the answer to this, but I've been asking everybody when I bring them on to the College Shuttle, what do Washington fans say to each other? Is there a chant? Is there is it go dogs?
Let's go dogs.
That's what I thought. Okay, I thought that's what it was. Okay.
It's absolutely go dogs.
All right. Well, there you go. So if you're up in the Northwest and someone says "Go Dogs," you know exactly what that means. So
We're
that's
not talking about
pretty cool.
Georgia.
No, no, no. That one's "Go Dogs." That's what that is. It's got a little more rasp Southern sound to it.
Yeah, we don't have a twang up here in the Northwest usually.
Thank you so much for joining me, Hooligan. Please go check out his channel, everybody, and make sure you're subscribed. Like this video. Make a comment down in the comment section below. We absolutely appreciate your time. Till next time, go dogs.